Well, howdy, partner. Name's Eureka Earl, and I thank you kindly for stopping by Guns and Nuggets. Round these parts, we spin tales where gold was struck, guns were drawn, and legends made. If this here story tickles your fancy, don't be shy. Tip your hat with a like, hitch your wagon with a subscribe, and tell your trail mates. Plenty more tales are waiting. Howdy, partner. Welcome on back to Guns and Nuggets. This here's old Earl, and I got me a fire crackling nice and warm tonight. Stars out bright as diamond chips scattered across black velvet. If you're new to these parts, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and settle in close. We're keeping the old stories alive out here, one tale at a time, and your support means the world to this old storyteller. Now then, let me ask you something. You ever held a coin in your hand and really felt the weight of it? Not just the metal, mind you, the actual weight of what it represents, what it cost, where it came from, what someone might have done to earn it, or didn't do. Most coins don't weigh much. A gold piece, even a double eagle that's less than an ounce of metal. You can toss it, spin it, flip it through your fingers without thinking twice. But some coins, some particular pieces of gold or silver, they carry a weight that's got nothing to do with what the assayer's scale says. They carry memory, guilt, the echo of the moment they changed hands under circumstances that weren't quite right. I'm going to tell you about one such coin tonight. A $20 gold piece that looked like any other Liberty's profile on one side, the eagle spreading its wings on the other, minted in San Francisco back in 1877. Beautiful piece of work, if you judged it purely on appearance. Gold that gleamed like bottled sunlight, edges sharp and clean, not worn down by years of honest exchange. But that coin wasn't honest. And the man who won it, well, he found out too late that some things cost more than their face value. Some things exact a price that keeps growing long after you think the transaction's done. The fire's crackling good now, sparks spiraling up into the night like little stars trying to rejoin their brothers overhead. The desert spreads out all around us, dark and vast and full of secrets it'll never tell. Out here, the line between the living world and whatever lies beyond it, that line gets thin as spider silk when the moon's dark and the wind's got teeth. This story I'm about to tell, it happened back in the 1880s, though the exact year depends on who's doing the telling. Some say it was 84, others claim 86. Don't matter much, I suppose. What matters is it happened, and the folks who knew the man involved, they remembered. Some tried to forget, but couldn't. That's how you know a story's got teeth. See? There was a poker game in a tent saloon outside Silver Creek, Montana territory. This was mining country, places where men came to get rich or die trying, and sometimes both happened at once. Silver Creek itself wasn't much more than a collection of canvas tents and rough timber buildings thrown up in a hurry, held together more by hope and whiskey than by nails and good sense. The saloon was called the Lucky Strike, which was optimistic naming if there ever was such a thing. Inside that tent, on a night when the wind howled down from the mountains like wolves singing their hunger, 5 men sat around a barrel that served as a card table. Oil lamps flickered, throwing shadows that danced along the canvas walls. Whiskey flowed, tobacco smoke hung thick as morning fog, and money, cash money, not promises or credit, sat piled in the center, waiting for cards to decide its fate. 4 of those men were regulars, miners, mostly fellows who worked the claims by day and tried to win back their wages by night. Decent enough sorts, the kind who'd share their last tin of beans if you were hungry, but who'd also shoot you for marked cards or a weighted die. The 5th man was new to town. Name was Jed Lowry, and he'd drifted in on the afternoon stage, dusty and road-worn, with a carpetbag and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Said he was passing through on his way to Oregon, just stopping long enough to rest his bones and maybe earn his next meal. Should have been his first night and his last night in Silver Creek. Should have played a few hands, lost or won modest, then moved on come morning like tumbleweed rolling where the wind pushes it. But that $20 gold piece was in the pot that night, And Jed Lowry had a talent for cards, not the honest kind of talent that comes from years of practice and a good memory, but the other kind. The kind that involves a holdout rig up his sleeve and fingers quick, enough to switch a card when attention's elsewhere. The hand that decided it all that came just past midnight, when exhaustion and whiskey had dulled the other player's watchfulness. Jed had dealt, which was his mistake of letting himself deal when he planned to cheat. Drew attention that way, even if nobody could quite say what he'd done wrong. The final pot had that gold piece in it, along with maybe $40 in paper money and silver. Not a fortune, but enough to matter to men who measured wealth in days of labor rather than years of investment. The game was 5-card draw, and after the cards were dealt and the drawing was done, it came down to Jed and a miner named Tom Garrett. Tom was a good man. Worked hard, drank moderate, sent money back to a wife and 3 children in Missouri. He'd been saving that gold piece for something special his daughter's wedding, or so he'd told the other men. Carried it for luck, but tonight, feeling confident, he'd put it in the pot. Jed showed 3 queens. Tom, his face fallen like a man watching his house burn, showed 3 jacks. "Pot's yours," Tom said quietly, pushing the money toward Jed. His hand lingered on that gold piece for just a moment, and something passed across his face, not anger, not even disappointment, but something deeper. Resignation, maybe, or a kind of sad knowing, like he'd seen the cheat but was too tired or too beaten down to call it out. The other men watched as Jed scooped up his winnings. One of them, a fellow named Dutch Henry who ran a claim up on the ridge, his eyes narrowed slightly. He'd seen something, or thought he had, but the moment passed and nobody spoke up. In a tent saloon in a mining camp where tomorrow might bring a cave-in or a knife fight or just another day of back-breaking labor for marginal returns, you didn't start trouble over suspicions. Jed pocketed the gold piece, felt it warm in his palm, heavier than it should have been, but he figured that was just the weight of good fortune smiling on him for once. He bought a round for the table generous in victory, as cheaters often are, and the game continued another hour before exhaustion claimed them all. Tom Garrett left without a word, walked out into the night air that was cold enough to hurt your lungs. Nobody saw him go. Nobody thought much about it at the time. Jed, for his part, felt good. Felt lucky, in fact. The kind of lucky that makes a man think maybe his fortunes are changing, maybe the hard times are behind him, maybe from here on out the world's going to show him its softer side. He fingered that gold piece in his pocket as he walked to the boarding house he'd rented a room in, spun it across his knuckles, the way gamblers do, the metal catching moonlight and throwing it back in golden flashes. $20. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to keep moving, enough to keep gambling, enough to keep telling himself he was just one big win away from respectability. That night, he slept sound, dreamed of poker hands that couldn't lose, of women who smiled at him with genuine affection instead of professional obligation, of a future where his past didn't follow him like a shadow at noon. When he woke the next morning, the gold piece was still in his pocket, still warm, like it had been against his skin all night, still shining like it was freshly minted. And that's where the story really begins, partner. Not with the winning of the coin, but with what came after, with the discovery that some things, once you take 'em, don't ever really leave. They just keep coming back heavier each time till the weight of 'em crushes you down to nothing. Funny thing about luck, partner. It always wants something back. And what it wanted from Jed Lowry, well, that debt took years to collect, and the interest on it that grew steeper with every dawn. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The fire's burning steady, the night's still young enough, and this story's got layers. Get to it like an onion that makes you cry the deeper you peel. Let me tell you about Jed Lowry and the coin that kept coming back. Tell you how a $20 gold piece bought more than he ever bargained for. Tell you what happens when greed meets guilt and neither one's willing to let go. Pour yourself some coffee if you got it. This one's going to take some time to tell proper. And the cold, well, the cold's just going to get deeper as we go. The desert wind's picking up now, carrying voices from long ago, or maybe just the sound of sand against rock. Hard to tell sometimes, out here where the past and present run together like whiskey and water in the same glass. Let's see where this tale takes us, you and me. Let's follow Jed Lowry down the road he walked, with that cursed coin weighing heavier in his pocket every step of the way. Now, if you'd asked Jed Lowry the morning after that poker game how he felt about his prospects, he'd have told you he felt damn good. Probably. Would have used that exact word too, damn. Jed wasn't much for church-going or watching his language, though his mama had tried her best to raise him proper before consumption took her when he was 12. He woke in that boarding house with sunshine streaming through a window so dirty it looked like looking through amber, and the first thing he did before his eyes were even fully open was reach for that gold piece. It was there, right where he'd left it, warm as flesh in his palm. Felt good. Felt right. Felt like maybe, finally, the universe was paying him back for all the times it had kicked him in the teeth. Jed's life up to that point hadn't been what you'd call fortunate. Born in Kentucky to a father who drank and a mother who died, raised by an aunt who tolerated him but never loved him, kicked out at 16 with nothing but the clothes on his back and his father's old watch, which he'd sold within a week for food money. He drifted west like so many young men did in those days, following rumors of gold and opportunity, finding mostly hard work and harder luck. He'd tried minning but wasn't strong enough for the heavy labor. Tried ranch work but got fired for being lazy. Tried clerking in a general store but got caught with his hand in the till. Cards, though cards he was good at. Had been since he was a boy, playing with his cousins for matches and buttons, discovering he had quick fingers and quicker eyes, a talent for reading faces and remembering what had been played. If he'd stuck to honest play, he might have made a decent living at it, but honest play meant losing sometimes, and Jed didn't like losing. So he'd learned the other skills, the palming and the bottom dealing, the marked decks and the holdout rigs. He wasn't proud of it, exactly, but he wasn't ashamed either. Figured the world didn't play fair with him, so why should he play fair with the world? That morning in Silver Creek, though, he felt like maybe he'd turned a corner. Had money in his pocket, real money, not promises. Had a good night's sleep in an actual bed instead of on the ground or in a flop house where the bed bugs bit harder than the landlady's dog. Had that gold piece, solid and real, proof that fortune could smile on him same as anybody else. He dressed slow, enjoying the luxury of not having to hurry, not having to pack up and run before somebody figured out his game. Put on his second-best shirt, the one without a burn hole from a dropped cigar, and his coat that was only a little threadbare at the elbows. Ran a comb through his hair, which was dark and thick and probably his best feature if you asked the ladies. Looked at himself in the small mirror over the wash basin and decided he looked like a man on his way up. 32 years old, which wasn't young but wasn't old neither. Still had his teeth, still had his health, still had enough charm to talk his way into or out of most situations. He pocketed the gold piece, felt its weight settle against his thigh through the fabric, and headed downstairs for breakfast. The boarding house served meals in a common room, long table where the guests sat elbow to elbow and ate what was put in front of them. That morning it was eggs and bacon, biscuits with gravy, coffee so strong it could strip paint. Jed ate like a king, enjoying every bite, feeling generous enough to compliment the landlady on her cooking. She smiled at him, actually smiled, like he was somebody worth smiling at, and brought him a second helping of bacon without him even asking. "You seem in good spirits this morning, Mr. Lowry," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "I am indeed. Fine day, fine meal, fine company. A man couldn't ask for better." After breakfast, he walked through town, just enjoying the feel of having money, of not needing to hurry to the next game or the next town. Silver Creek looked better in daylight than it had the night before, still rough and temporary, but with a kind of energy to it. Men moving with purpose, wagons hauling ore, the sound of picks and hammers echoing from the hills. A place being born, even if it probably wouldn't live much past the silver running out. Jed stopped at the general store, bought himself some good tobacco, not the cheap stuff that burned your throat, but Virginia leaf, smooth and rich. The clerk was friendly, made conversation, asked if he was staying in town long. "Few days, maybe," Jed said. "See how the cards fall." The clerk laughed. "Well, good luck to you. Though from the look of you, seems like luck's already found you." And it had, or so it seemed. That whole day went smooth as glass. Jed played cards in the afternoon, honest play this time. Didn't need to cheat when the cards were falling his way natural. Won $30 and didn't even break a sweat. The other players were friendly, bought him drinks, treated him like one of their own. That evening, he treated himself to a steak dinner at the Tent restaurant. Best meal he'd had in months, maybe years. The meat was tender, the potatoes were creamy, and the pie, Lord, that pie was something that made you believe in heaven, even if you'd stopped believing in most other things. After dinner, he walked out under stars so bright they looked like holes poked in black paper with light streaming through from the other side. Pulled out that gold piece, spun it in his fingers, watched it catch starlight and throw it back. Felt like the luckiest man alive. Over the next few weeks, that feeling only got stronger. Everywhere Jed went, fortune smiled. He'd sit down at a poker table and walk away with winnings. He'd bet on a horse race and pick the winner. He'd flip a coin to decide which trail to take and end up in a town where the pickings were easy and the law was lenient. He moved through Nevada and into Utah, always staying ahead of his reputation, never in one place long enough for folks to compare notes and realize he'd been lucky a few too many times to be entirely on the level. But the truth was, he wasn't cheating much anymore. Didn't need to. The cards just came to him. The way water flows downhill. Natural. Easy. He started carrying himself different. Shoulders back, head up, smile coming easier. Started thinking about maybe settling down somewhere, buying a saloon or a hotel, becoming respectable. Started thinking about maybe even finding a wife, though that was probably getting ahead of himself. But the gold piece, that gold piece went everywhere with him. Kept it in his pocket during the day, under his pillow at night. Never spent it, even when he was running short on other funds. It was his lucky charm, his talisman, the physical proof that his fortunes had changed. Except there was something strange about it that he noticed but didn't want to acknowledge. Something that nagged at him like a splinter you can't quite see but can always feel, no matter how many times he thought about spending it, and he thought about it often, looked at it and considered whether this meal or that whiskey or this poker ante was worth breaking into his lucky piece. He never actually did. Couldn't bring himself to part with it. It felt too important, too central to his good fortune. And there was something else, something he tried not to think about but couldn't entirely ignore. Every morning, when he woke, that coin was in his pocket. Even nights when he was sure he'd put it on the nightstand or in his boot for safekeeping, come dawn it was back in his pocket. Same position, right side, warm against his leg through the fabric. First few times it happened, he figured he was misremembering. Must have pocketed it in his sleep or put it there in the first place and forgot. But after a week of this, he started paying closer attention. Started deliberately putting the coin places in a drawer, in his carpet bag, once even in the pocket of a coat he wasn't wearing. Every morning it was back in his pocket, the pocket he was wearing. He told himself he was imagining things, told himself he was probably sleepwalking, moving the coin without remembering. Told himself a lot of things to avoid the uncomfortable truth that was starting to press on his mind like a weight on his chest. The coin was coming back to him, on its own, without any logical explanation. About a month after that poker game in Silver Creek, Jed found himself in a little town called Prosperity, another optimistically named mining camp where men came to chase dreams made of silver and left with pockets full of nothing but dust and regret. He was sitting in a saloon, having won a small pot earlier, feeling good, when a beggar came through. Old man, bent with age or hardship or both, milky eyes that suggested he couldn't see much anymore, clothes that were more patched than original cloth. He moved from table to table, hat in hand, asking for spare change in a voice that had long since given up on pride or dignity. Most folks ignored him. A few threw pennies in his hat, more to make him go away than out of any genuine charity. When he reached Jed's table, he stood there patient-like, not saying anything, just waiting with that hat extended. Jed, feeling generous from his winning and his good fortune, reached into his pocket. His hand closed around that gold piece, the first time he'd seriously considered parting with it. $20. That was a fortune to a beggar. Could keep the old man fed and housed for weeks, maybe months if he was careful with it. For just a moment, Jed felt good about himself. Felt like maybe he was a decent person after all, capable of generosity, capable of helping someone worse off than himself. His fingers closed around the coin, ready to pull it out and drop it in that worn hat. But he couldn't let go. His fingers wouldn't release it. The coin seemed stuck to his palm, or maybe his palm was stuck to the coin. He tried to open his hand, tried to make himself drop that gold piece into the beggar's hat, but it was like his body wouldn't obey his mind. The moment stretched out, awkward and strange. The beggar stood there waiting. The other men at the table watched, and Jed sat there with his hand in his pocket, face flushing red with embarrassment and something else, something that might have been fear. Finally, he pulled out a silver dollar instead, dropped it in the hat with a clatter, louder than it needed to be, covering his confusion with forced generosity. "There you go, old-timer. Get yourself a meal and a bed." The beggar nodded his thanks and shuffled away. The other men went back to their cards and their whiskey, and Jed sat there with that gold piece still in his pocket, still warm, still somehow heavier than it should be. That night, for the first time, he tried to get rid of it on purpose. Waited until dark, walked down to the creek that ran through town, pulled out that coin and looked at it hard in the moonlight. $20, just a piece of metal, stamped with symbols and words that gave it meaning and value. Nothing more than that. He threw it as hard as he could, heard it splash into the water, watched the ripples spread in the moonlight until they faded to nothing. Walked back to his room feeling lighter, relieved even, like he'd shed a burden he hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying. Went to bed without the coin for the first time in weeks. Woke the next morning with it in his pocket. Same coin, same warmth, same weight. But now when he looked at it, in the gray light of dawn coming through his window, it seemed darker somehow. The gold didn't shine quite as bright, and if he listened, really listened, he could almost hear something. Not words, exactly, more like a whisper underneath a whisper. A sound that might have been wind, or might have been breath, or might have been something else entirely. Jed stared at that coin for a long time that morning, watched the sun come up and turn the gold from dark to bright again. And he realized something that sent ice water through his veins despite the warm desert air. He hadn't won that coin. He'd taken it. Stolen it, if you wanted to use the harsh word. Cheated a good man out of something that mattered to him, something he'd been saving for his daughter's future. And now it wouldn't leave. Some things, once you take them, they don't ever really leave. They just keep coming back, heavier each time, till the weight of them crushes you down to nothing. That gold piece, it wasn't a lucky charm. It wasn't a blessing from a universe that had finally decided to smile on him. It was something else entirely. And Jed Lowry, lucky, fortunate Jed Lowry, he was starting to realize that his good fortune might just be the worst luck he'd ever had. The fire crackles, sparks spiraling up into darkness that seems deeper than it did before. And I gotta tell you, partner, this is where the story stops being about winning and starts being about what happens when what you won turns out to cost more than you ever imagined paying. A lot more. For a while, maybe 2, 3 weeks after throwing that coin in the creek and finding it back in his pocket come morning, Jed tried to convince himself it was a blessing. Tried to tell himself that a coin that wouldn't leave was exactly what a gambler needed. Permanent luck. A charm that couldn't be lost or stolen or gambled away. He'd pull it out in the morning light, spin it through his fingers, and laugh at the impossibility of it all. "Well, ain't you something?" he'd say to the coin, like it was a pet that had learned a clever trick. "Loyal as a good dog, you are. Tried to make light of it, see? Tried to turn something strange into something amusing, the way folks do when they're facing down a truth they ain't ready to acknowledge. His winning streak continued. He moved through Utah territory and into Colorado, always finding games, always. Walking away with more money than he'd sat down with. Bought himself new clothes, a proper suit, black wool with a vest, boots that actually fit and didn't have holes worn through the soles. Got his hair cut regular, trimmed his mustache, started looking like a man of means instead of a drifter. He told himself this was what success looked like. Told himself he'd finally figured out the secret to making it in the West, not through back-breaking labor in the mines or soul-destroying work in the fields, but through skill and luck combined, through being smart enough to know when to bet and when to fold. But the coin was getting heavier. Not physically heavier if you'd put it on a scale. It still would have weighed exactly what a $20 gold piece should weigh. But in his pocket, against his leg, in his hand, when he took it out and looked at it, it felt heavier, substantial, like it was made of something denser than gold, something that wanted to pull him down. He tried, leaving it behind more deliberately, not just throwing it in a creek, but trying different methods, getting creative in his attempts to be shed of it. In a town called Clearwater, he left it on the bar when he settled his tab, just walked away without looking back. Heard it clink on the wood, heard the bartender call after him, "Sir, you forgot your money." But Jed kept walking out the door and down the street to his hotel. Slept fitful that night, waking every hour to check his pocket, hoping it would stay empty. Come dawn, the coin was there. Same pocket, same warmth. In Denver, he tried giving it to a street preacher who was ranting about salvation and sin on a corner where three roads met. Walked up to the man, pressed the coin into his hand, said, "For the Lord's work," and walked away fast. The preacher called blessings after him, promising prayers and heavenly rewards. That night, the coin was in Jed's pocket. He tried burying it in an empty lot, digging a hole 3 feet deep with his bare hands, dropping the coin in and covering it with dirt and rocks and a piece of broken fence post so he could find the spot again if he changed his mind. Walked away satisfied that this time it would stay gone. You can't follow a man if you're buried underground. Next morning, there it was. A little dirt on it this time, like it had clawed its way out of the earth to get back to him. He tried to wipe the dirt off, but some of it seemed to have stained the gold, made it darker in the crevices of Lady Liberty's hair, in the feathers of the eagle's wings. He tried throwing it from a moving train, tossing it out the window as the landscape rushed past at 40 miles an hour. Watched it tumble through the air, glint once in the sunlight, and disappear into the scrub brush and rocks. Woke the next morning in a hotel in Cheyenne with the coin in his pocket, still warm, still somehow watching him, though coins don't have eyes and can't watch nothing. Each time he tried to get rid of it and it came back, Jed felt something shift inside himself. The amusement curdled into unease. The unease deepened into worry. The worry grew teeth and became fear, because he was starting to understand, really understand, that this wasn't about luck anymore, if it ever had been. This was about something else entirely, something that had grabbed hold of him that night in Silver Creek when he'd cheated Tom Garrett out of his lucky piece and wasn't planning on letting go. The weight of the coin increased. Not every day, but gradual like, the way seasons change or a man ages. He'd reach into his pocket, and his hand would expect one thing but feel another, a heaviness that shouldn't be there, that made his coat hang wrong on one side, that pulled at his pocket seams. He started walking different, favoring his right leg slightly because that's where the coin rested, like he was carrying a stone instead of a piece of gold. His back ached, his hip joint complained. For a man still in his early 30s, he was moving like someone considerably older, and the dreams started, not every night, but often enough. Dreams of Tom Garrett standing at the end of a long road, his back to Jed, never turning around no matter how much Jed called to him. Dreams of poker tables where the cards were all blank, where he'd look at his hand and see nothing but white paper, meaningless and empty. Dreams of gold coins raining from the sky like hail, pelting him, burying him, until he woke gasping for air and clutching at his chest. Worst were the dreams where he could hear whispering, couldn't make out the words, couldn't identify the voice, but he knew the way you know things in dreams, that it was the coin talking, telling him things he didn't want to hear, making promises he didn't want kept, binding him to agreements he'd never made but somehow couldn't break. He'd wake from these dreams with the taste of copper in his mouth and his hand already, reaching for his pocket, checking to make sure the coin was still there, which was insane, really, because he didn't want it there. But he couldn't stop checking, couldn't stop confirming its presence, like his body knew something his mind was still refusing to accept. About 2 months after the poker game, Jed tried one more thing. He was in a town called Redemption. Seemed fitting, that name, and he sought out the local church. Presbyterian, with a white steeple and a cross that caught the afternoon sun. He waited until the place was empty, then slipped inside. It was quiet in there, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, that presses on you like you're underwater. Smelled of old wood and candle wax and the particular mustiness of hymnals that ain't been opened near enough. He walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. At the front, there was an offering box, simple pine with a slot in the top. He pulled out the coin, held it up to the light coming. Through the stained glass windows, reds and blues painting his hand in colors that reminded him of bruises. "I'm giving this to you," he whispered, not sure if he was talking to God or the coin or himself. "Giving it to the church for whatever good it can do. Take it, please. Just take it and let me be." He dropped the coin through the slot, heard it land with a heavy thunk on whatever coins were already in there. The sound seemed louder than it should have been, seemed to echo through the empty church like a judgment being pronounced. He stood there for a moment, hands empty, heart pounding. Felt like maybe, finally, this would work. Sacred ground offering to God all the proper rituals. Surely that would be enough to break whatever connection existed between himself and that cursed piece of gold. He left the church, closed the door quiet behind him, and walked back to his hotel feeling lighter than he had in weeks. That night, he slept better than he had since Silver Creek. No dreams, no whispers, just darkness and rest. But come morning, the coin was in his pocket, and this time, Jed didn't laugh, didn't try to make light of it. Just sat on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands and felt something break inside him. The last bit of denial, maybe. The final fragment of hope that this was all somehow normal, explainable, manageable. He was stuck with this thing. This gold piece that wouldn't leave, that kept coming back no matter what he did, that was getting heavier and darker and more wrong with every sunrise. And the worst part, the part that terrified him more than anything else, was that he was starting to hear it. Not in dreams anymore, but awake. In quiet moments when the world went still, he could hear it. A voice like wind through a canyon, a sound like his own heartbeat slowed down and played backwards. It wasn't saying words yet, not quite, but it was saying something, and Jed knew, deep in whatever part of him was still capable of knowing truth, that eventually he'd understand what it was saying, and when he did, when those whispers became words he could comprehend, that's when things would get really bad. He looked at himself in the mirror that morning and barely recognized what looked back. Same face, mostly, but there was something different around the eyes, a tightness, a fear that had settled in and made itself at home. He looked older, haunted, like a man carrying weight that didn't show but couldn't be set down. "What do you want?" he asked the coin, pulling it from his pocket and staring at it hard. "What the hell do you want from me?" The coin didn't answer, just sat there in his palm, warm as blood, heavy as guilt, gleaming in the morning light like it had every right to be exactly where it was. And Jed Lowry realized something that should have been obvious from the start, but that he'd been too proud or too stupid or too desperate to acknowledge. Some things just don't like being owned. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe he didn't own the coin at all. Maybe it owned him. And the price of that ownership, well, he was only just beginning to understand what that might cost. The fire's burning lower now, and the cold's creeping in around the edges of its warmth. I add another piece of wood, watch the sparks fly up like souls escaping purgatory, and settle in for the next part of this tale. Because Jed's troubles, they were only just getting started. The coin wouldn't leave, wouldn't let him go, and soon, real soon now, it was going to start exacting the price for that poker game back in Silver Creek. A price measured not in gold, but in something considerably more valuable, considerably more permanent. The thing about curses, and we can call it that now, no point in pretending. Otherwise, the thing about curses is they don't just sit quiet and let you carry 'em. They don't just weight you down and leave it at that. Eventually, they demand payment. Eventually, the bill comes due in ways you never anticipated and can't possibly afford. For Jed Lowry, that bill came due in a town called Silver Creek, same town where he'd won the coin. He'd been avoiding it for near about 3 months, taking routes that went miles out of his way just to make sure he didn't have to pass through. Something in him knew the way animals know when a storm's coming that going back there would be a mistake. But the coin had other ideas. He'd been in Nevada, working his way north toward Idaho territory, when his horse threw a shoe. This was rough country, not a lot of settlements, and the nearest town that might have a blacksmith was Silver Creek. He tried to argue with geography, tried to convince himself there had to be another option. But there wasn't, not unless he wanted to walk his horse for 3 days through territory where the Bannock had been raiding just the month before. So he turned east, toward the one place he'd been trying. Hardest not to go. Rode into Silver Creek on an afternoon when the sun was brutal and the dust was thick enough to taste. The town hadn't changed much. Still the same collection of rough buildings and tents. Still the same desperate energy of a place trying to squeeze wealth out of rock that mostly didn't want to give it up. He took his horse to the blacksmith, paid for the new shoe and a night's stabling, then found himself walking toward the Lucky Strike saloon before he'd fully decided that's where he was going. Like his feet knew better than his head what needed to happen. The saloon was busier than it had been that night 3 months ago. Maybe 15, 20 men inside, the afternoon crowd trying to wash the dust out of their throats before heading back to work or home or wherever men like that go when they ain't drinking. Jed found a spot at the bar, ordered whiskey, and tried not to look around too obvious-like. But he was looking for Tom Garrett. Couldn't help himself. Part of him wanted to see the man, to maybe explain, to possibly apologize. Another part wanted to make sure Tom was all right, that losing that gold piece hadn't destroyed him, that Jed's cheat hadn't caused real harm beyond the loss of $20. He asked the bartender, casual as he could manage. Tom Garrett still around? Used to see him in here playing cards. The bartender, different man from before, younger, with a scar across his chin that suggested he'd settled at least one argument with his face. He looked at Jed with something that might have been suspicion, or might have just been the natural wariness of a man who serves whiskey to strangers. Tom Garrett's dead, the bartender said flatly. Near about 2 months now. The words hit Jed like a fist to the gut. The whiskey glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Dead? How? Hung himself. The bartender said it matter of fact, the way you'd comment on the weather. Up in his room at the boarding house, used his belt. Landlady found him in the morning, 3 days after he was already gone. Jed's hand was shaking when he set the glass down. Why? Why'd he do it? The bartender shrugged. Who knows why anybody does anything? Man was broke, I guess. Sent his last money to his family back in Missouri. Didn't keep enough to feed himself. Some folks say he'd been saving a gold piece for his daughter's wedding, but lost it in a poker game. Couldn't face telling his wife he'd gambled away their daughter's future. Couldn't face going back empty-handed. So he ended it. The room spun. Jed gripped the bar to steady himself, his vision narrowing to a tunnel with the bartender's face at the far end. Tom Garrett, dead, hung himself because of that coin. Because Jed had cheated him out of his daughter's future. You all right, mister? The bartender was looking at him with more interest now, less suspicion and more concern. You look like you seen a ghost. I'm fine, Jed managed. Just didn't expect that. News. Tom was a good man. That's what they say. The bartender refilled Jed's glass without asking. Good men die, same as bad ones, though. Sometimes easier. Jed tried to drink but couldn't. His throat had closed up, his stomach rolling like he was on a ship in rough seas. He could see Tom Garrett in his mind sitting across that barrel table, pushing the pot toward Jed after losing that final hand, his face fallen but resigned. Could see him walking out into the cold night, alone with his loss, carrying the weight of having failed his family. Could see him 3 days later, cold and stiff, swinging slow from a belt in a rented room, his face purple and his tongue swollen, his last thoughts probably of the daughter who'd never have her wedding, the wife who'd never forgive him for gambling away their savings. Because of Jed. Because of a cheat. Because of that damned gold piece that was burning hot in Jed's pocket now. Hot enough that he wondered if the fabric would start smoking. He paid for his drinks with paper money, couldn't bring himself to even think about touching that coin, and stumbled out into the street. The sunlight felt wrong, too bright, too clean for what he was feeling. He made it about 3 steps before he had to lean against a hitching post, breathing hard, fighting the urge to vomit right there in the dust. Tom Garrett was dead, and Jed had killed him, as surely as if he'd put the belt around the man's neck himself. He should have left town then. Should have gotten on his horse and ridden until Silver Creek was a week behind him and a memory he could maybe start to forget. But he didn't. Couldn't. The coin was heavy in his pocket, heavier than it had ever been, and his legs felt like they were made of lead. Moving seemed impossible. Thinking seemed impossible. All he could do was stand there in the street, leaning against that post, and feel the full weight of what he'd done. Evening came. The sun dropped behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors that reminded Jed of blood and bruises. He was still standing there when a thought occurred to him so clear and obvious he wondered why it hadn't come sooner. He should spend the coin. Should use it, get rid of it properly by exchanging it for goods or services. Maybe that's what it wanted. Maybe it had been waiting all this time for him to actually spend it instead of just trying to abandon it. The idea filled him with something that felt almost like hope. He could go back to the saloon, use the coin to buy a round for the house, and maybe finally be free of it. Let someone else carry it for a while. Let it be just money again, circulating through the economy the way money's supposed to, instead of this cursed thing that kept returning to his pocket like a bad dog coming home. He walked back to the Lucky Strike with purpose. The evening crowd was thicker now, men finishing their work day and settling in for serious drinking. Jed pushed through to the bar, pulling out that gold piece, even though his hand didn't want to obey him, even though every instinct screamed at him to put it away, to keep it hidden, to not do what he was about to do. "Whiskey for everyone," he announced, loud enough to be heard over the noise. He held up the coin so it caught the lamplight. "On me, $20 worth of the good stuff." A cheer went up. Men surged toward the bar, eager for free liquor, slapping Jed on the back and calling him a prince among men. The bartender, same young fellow from earlier, grinned and started pouring. Jed set the coin on the bar. The bartender reached for it, and for just a moment, just the briefest flicker of time, the man hesitated. His hand hovered over the gold piece like he'd touched something hot and pulled back. His grin faltered. Then he picked it up, held it to the light to check it was genuine, and dropped it in the cash box under the bar. "Much obliged, friend," he said to Jed. "That's mighty. Generous of you." Jed felt lighter immediately. The weight was gone from his pocket, gone from his soul. The coin was out of his possession, exchanged in proper commerce, no longer his problem. He accepted a glass of whiskey from the bartender and lifted it high. "To Tom Garrett," he said. Not sure why he was saying it except that it felt necessary, felt like the only toast that mattered. Good man, decent man. May he rest easy. A few men echoed the toast, though most didn't know who Tom Garrett was or why they were drinking to him. They just drank because the whiskey was free and because that's what men do in saloons. They drink, and they don't ask too many questions. Jed was on his second glass, starting to feel the whiskey warm his belly and soften the edges of his guilt. when the bartender made a sound. Not a word, just a sound something between a gasp and a grunt, the kind of noise a man makes when something inside him suddenly goes wrong. Jed turned. The bartender was standing, frozen, one hand pressed to his chest, his face gone pale as desert bone. His eyes were wide, his mouth open, his breath coming in short gasps that didn't seem to be bringing in enough air. "You all right?" someone asked. The bartender didn't answer, couldn't answer. He took one stumbling step backward, his hand still clutched to his chest, his face twisting with pain or fear or both. Then he fell, just collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, crashed down behind the bar with a sound that was somehow both heavy and brittle. Bottles fell, glasses shattered, and for a moment the whole saloon went quiet as death. Men rushed to help, pulled the bartender out from behind the bar, laid him on the floor, loosened his collar. Someone called for a doctor. Someone else started praying, though whether for the bartender or for themselves it was hard to say. But Jed knew before anyone checked for a pulse, knew before the doctor arrived and confirmed it, knew in his bones and his blood and his guilty heart that the bartender was dead. Heart stopped mid-laugh, mid-pour, mid-life, just stopped, like someone had blown out a candle. And there, on the bar where it had rolled during the bartender's collapse, was the gold piece, still gleaming, still warm, and now, if you looked close, there was something on it. A smear on Lady Liberty's face, dark and wet. Jed reached for it without thinking, picked it up with shaking fingers, and saw what he'd feared, blood. Just a little, just enough to notice, and when he tried to wipe it off with his thumb, it didn't budge. Stayed there like a stain that had soaked into the gold itself, permanent and accusing. The coin was still his, and it had taken a life to stay that way. Jed ran, pushed through the crowd of men clustering around the dead bartender, stumbled out into the night air, and kept running until his lungs burned and his legs gave out and he found himself on his knees in the dirt at the edge of town, heaving up whiskey and bile and the taste of copper that wouldn't wash away no matter how much he spat. The coin was in his hand. He'd grabbed it without thinking, without meaning to, and now it was there, warm and heavy and stained with blood that wouldn't come off. He tried to throw it away. Couldn't. His fingers wouldn't open, wouldn't release it. The coin was stuck to his palm like it had grown roots into his flesh. "Please," he whispered to the darkness, to God, to whatever force controlled such things. "Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this. I didn't mean for Tom to die, didn't mean for that bartender to die. But what had he wanted? Money? Luck? To win for once instead of always scrapping by? Seemed like such small, stupid things now, seemed hardly worth a single life, let alone two. His fingers finally opened. The coin dropped into the dirt, and Jed scrambled backward, putting distance between himself and that cursed piece of gold. He stood, brushed off his knees, and walked away. Didn't run this time, just walked, slow and steady, back toward the stable where his horse was waiting. He saddled up in the dark, paid the stable boy with paper money, and rode out of Silver Creek for what he swore would be the last time. Rode hard through the night, putting miles between himself and that town, that saloon, that dead bartender whose name he'd never even learned. Dawn came cold and gray. Jed stopped to water his horse at a creek, and when he reached into his pocket for his pipe, the coin was there. Same warmth, same weight, same bloodstain on Liberty's face, back in his pocket like it had never left. And Jed Lowry, sitting there by that creek with the sun coming up and his horse drinking peaceful like and the birds starting their morning songs, Jed finally understood the full scope of what he'd gotten himself into. This wasn't about the coin coming back to him. That was just the mechanism, the method. What this was really about was payment. The coin was collecting a debt, and the currency it demanded wasn't gold. It was blood. The fire's burning low again, and I'm cold despite the flames. This story, it's got a chill to it that goes deeper than desert nights and mountain air. It's the cold of understanding that some debts can't be paid with money, that some prices can't be calculated until it's too late to negotiate, Jed had spent the coin, and someone had died. That was the pattern now. That was the rule he was only just beginning to comprehend. And the worst part, the part that was going to haunt him through every mile and every day to come, was that he couldn't stop carrying it. Couldn't get rid of it. Couldn't do anything but watch as it collected its terrible price from everyone around him. $20, bought with a cheat, and now being repaid in a currency that's worth infinitely more and infinitely less than gold. Human lives. After Silver Creek, Jed ran. Not toward anything. Just away from the memory of the bartender collapsing. Away from Tom Garrett's ghost. Away from himself. If that was possible, he rode through Nevada into California, then north into Oregon, never staying more than a few days in any place, always moving before roots could take hold or questions could be asked. He didn't spend the coin again, wouldn't touch it except when absolutely necessary, wouldn't even look at it if he could help it, kept it in his pocket like a man might keep a rattlesnake, constantly aware of it, constantly afraid of it, but unable to figure out how to be shed of it without getting bit. But the coin had its own ideas about being spent. In a town called Hangtown, ironic name, that, given what was coming, Jed was playing cards in a respectable establishment, a real saloon with sawdust floors and a piano player who knew more than 3 songs. He was playing honest, hadn't cheated in weeks, just trying to win enough to keep moving, without drawing attention. The game was friendly enough. 5 men, including Jed, playing 5-card stud for modest stakes. Conversation flowed along with the whiskey, talk of claims and whether the railroad would ever make it up this far. Normal things, safe things. One of the players was a fellow named Jack Morton, a gambler by trade, older than Jed by maybe 10 years, with the kind of face that had seen too many bad beats and learned to smile through 'em anyway. Jack was losing steady but not complaining, just accepting the turns of the cards with the resignation of a man who knew luck was a fickle mistress. Round about 11 o'clock, after Jed had won a modest pot with a pair of kings, Jack reached into his vest pocket to pull out money for the next ante. His fingers came out empty except for lint and a button that had come loose. "Well, hell," Jack said, not angry, just tired. "That's it for me, boys." Cleaned out. Again, he started to stand, ready to call it a night. And that's when something happened that Jed didn't intend, didn't plan, didn't even understand until it was already done. His hand went to his pocket, pulled out that gold piece, held it across the table toward Jack. "Here." Jed heard himself saying, like his mouth was working independent of his brain, "Consider it a loan. Pay me back when you can." He tried to stop himself, tried to pull his hand back, to put the coin away, to keep it from touching Jack Morton's fingers, but he couldn't. His arm moved on its own, controlled by something that wasn't him, possessed by the will of the coin itself. Jack looked surprised but pleased. "That's mighty generous of you, friend." "You sure?" "No." Jed wanted to scream. "Don't take it. Whatever you do, don't touch that coin." But what came out of his mouth was, "Sure am. Buy yourself back in. Maybe your luck'll change." Jack took the coin. Jed felt the weight leave his palm, felt the warmth transfer from his flesh to Jack's, and for just a moment there was a sensation like something electric passing between them. Jack flinched, just barely, but then smiled and pocketed the $20 gold piece. "Much obliged," Jack said, settling back into his chair. "I'll pay you back by end of the week. You have my word." Jed wanted to leave, wanted to run, but he was frozen in his chair, unable to move, forced to watch whatever was about to happen. The next hand was dealt. Jack's luck did change. He won with a full house, 8s over 5s. Won again with a straight, then again with 3 queens. His chip stack grew. He laughed, some of the weariness leaving his face, replaced with the kind of hope that gamblers live for the belief that this time, finally, fortune was smiling. They played another hour. Jack kept winning. Jed kept losing, but he couldn't focus on the cards, couldn't think about strategy. All he could think about was that coin, now in Jack Morton's pocket, warm against the man's ribs, ticking down like a clock toward midnight. Finally, near about midnight actual time, Jack stood up. His pockets were full, his face was flushed with whiskey and winning, and he clapped Jed on the shoulder with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, friend," he said. "That $20 you loaned me, that turned my whole night around. Tomorrow I'll—" He stopped mid-sentence. His hand, still resting on Jed's shoulder, suddenly gripped tight. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Jack," one of the other players said. "Jack, you all right?" Jack wasn't all right. His face had gone gray, his breath was coming in short gasps, and his free hand clutched at his chest like he was trying to hold something inside that was determined to get out. He collapsed, fell right there beside the poker table, his winnings spilling from his pockets, silver dollars and paper money, and one $20 gold piece that rolled across the floor and came to rest against Jed's boot. Men rushed to help. The piano player stopped mid-song. Someone ran for the doctor, but Jed knew it was pointless, knew before anyone checked, knew because he'd seen this before. Jack Morton's heart had stopped. Just stopped, same as the bartender's had. Same sudden violent cessation of life, like a candle going out in a strong wind, and the coin was back, had rolled right to Jed like a faithful dog returning to its master, warm, heavy, and now with another stain on it, another dark smear that hadn't been there before, another mark that wouldn't wipe away. This time, Jed didn't run. What was the point? He picked up the coin, dropped it in his pocket with hands that had gone numb, and walked out of that saloon like a man walking to his own hanging. The night air was cold, but he barely felt it, barely felt anything except the weight in his pocket and the knowledge, cold and certain as mountain snow, that he was carrying death. Not just death, murder. Because even if he didn't mean it, even if he hadn't intended for Jack Morton to die, the fact remained. Jed had given him that coin knowing what it did, knowing what might happen. He was a killer now. No way around it. The pattern repeated itself. Town after town. Death after death. Jed tried to stop it. Tried to keep the coin to himself. Tried never to let it leave his possession. But the coin had other ideas. It would force his hand, literally take control of his muscles and make him give it away, make him spend it, make him share the curse whether he wanted to or not. In a mining camp called Last Chance, he tried to buy supplies at a general store, meant to use paper money, had it in his hand ready to pay. But when the shopkeeper tallied up the bill and said, "That'll be $18, friend," Jed's hand went to his pocket, pulled out the gold piece and set it on the counter before he could stop himself. "Keep the change," he heard himself say, though he was screaming inside, screaming at himself to pick up the coin, to take it back, to use different money. The shopkeeper was a woman, maybe 45, with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. She took the coin, smiled at him, and said, "That's very generous. God bless you." 2 hours later, they found her dead behind the counter. "Heart failure," the doctor said. Strange, for a woman that young, that healthy, but these things happen. The coin was in Jed's pocket when he heard the news, still warm, a new stain adding itself to the collection already there. In Portland, a preacher approached him on the street, asking for donations to help rebuild the church after a fire. Jed tried to refuse, tried to walk away, but his hand went to his pocket without his permission, pulled out that cursed $20, and pressed it into the preacher's palm. "For the Lord's work," Jed said, though he was crying inside, though he wanted to scream a warning. The preacher thanked him, blessed him, promised to pray for his soul. 2 days later, the preacher choked to death on a piece of bread during Sunday dinner. Just choked, couldn't breathe, turned blue while his congregation watched helpless, and died with his hands clutched around his own throat like he was trying to strangle himself. The coin came back. Always came back. A horse trader in Sacramento, a Chinese laundry worker in San Francisco, a dance hall girl in Virginia City who'd only touched the coin for a moment, counting change after Jed had bought a bottle of whiskey. They all died, all sudden, all unexplained. all within hours of touching that $20 gold piece that Jed had won in a crooked card game and couldn't get rid of no matter what he tried. He started counting. 8 deaths, 9, 10. He lost count after a while, the faces blurring together, the names forgotten or never learned. All he knew was that everywhere he went, death followed. The coin demanded its price, and Jed was forced to pay it with other people's lives. He stopped sleeping more than an hour, or 2 at a time. Couldn't bear the dreams' faces of the dead, all of them staring at him with accusing eyes, all of them asking why. Why did you give us that coin? Why did you kill us? He stopped eating regular. Food tasted like ash. Whiskey, which used to take the edge off, now just made everything worse, loosened his grip on reality enough that he could see the shadows that followed him, the shapes that weren't quite there but weren't quite not there either. The coin grew heavier. Day by day, the weight increased. His pocket seams started to tear from the strain. His leg ached constant from carrying it. He walked with a limp now, favoring his right side, moving like an old man though he was barely into his 30s. And the whispers, Lord, the whispers, they weren't just in his dreams anymore. They were constant, a background noise like wind or water, always there, even in crowded rooms, even in broad daylight. The coin was talking to him, and though he couldn't make out the way, or words yet, he knew they were getting clearer. Eventually, he'd understand what it was saying. Eventually, the message would come through. He thought about killing himself. Thought about it often, in fact. Figured if he was dead, the curse would end. The coin couldn't keep claiming victims if its carrier was in the ground. But every time he worked up, the nerve held a gun to his head, stood at the edge of a cliff, tied a rope around his neck. Something stopped him. His finger wouldn't pull the trigger. His feet wouldn't step forward. His hands wouldn't tighten the noose. The coin wouldn't let him die. It needed him alive, needed him moving through the world, needed him touching other people so it could collect its debt, one death at a time. He tried explaining it once, in a moment of desperation, to a priest in a church in Boise. Told the whole story, the poker game, the cheat, Tom Garrett's death, the coin that wouldn't leave, the people who died whenever he spent it. Laid it all out, hoping for absolution or at least understanding. The priest listened, his face grave, his hands folded in prayer. When Jed finished, the priest was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My son, what you're describing sounds like the burden of guilt. The coin is just a coin. The deaths are coincidences. What you're carrying is the weight of your conscience, punishing you for your sin. Confess, repent, and seek God's forgiveness. That's the only way to be free." Jed pulled out the coin, held it up so the priest could see the stains on it, the dark marks that wouldn't wash away, that seemed to shift and move in the candlelight like shadows of the dead. "This ain't guilt," Jed said quietly. "This is real. This is—" He'd meant to just show the priest the coin, meant to hold it up as evidence and then put it away. But his hand moved without his permission, extended the coin toward the priest, offered it like a gift. "No," Jed tried to pull his hand back. "Don't touch it. Please, Father, don't." But the priest, thinking Jed was offering a donation, reached out and took the coin from his palm. "Thank you, my son. This will help feed." The priest stopped. His eyes went wide. The coin dropped from his fingers, hit the stone floor with a ring that echoed through the empty church. He staggered backward, one hand pressed to his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. What did you—" Jed was already moving, already running for the door, unable to watch another death, unable to bear witness to one more person dying because of him, because of that cursed piece of gold that he'd won with a cheat and couldn't be rid of. Behind him, he heard the priest collapse, heard the heavy thud of a body hitting stone, heard the terrible silence that follows when a heart stops beating and a life ends without warning or ceremony. He ran until his lungs burned, ran until he couldn't run any more, and when he finally stopped, gasping for air in an alley, behind a warehouse, his hand automatically went to his pocket. The coin was there, still warm, still heavy, still carrying the blood of everyone who'd touched it everyone who died so that Jed Lowry could keep carrying his guilt in physical form. "What do you want?" he shouted into the darkness, though there was no one to hear him. "What the hell do you want from me? How many people have to die? How much blood is enough?" The whispers grew louder. Still not words, not quite, but getting closer. And Jed knew, with the certainty of the damned, that when he finally understood what the coin was saying, when the whispers became clear enough to comprehend, that's when the real horror would begin. Because he thought it was gold he was carrying, thought it was a curse, a punishment, a burden imposed from outside. But the truth was starting to dawn on him, cold and terrible as a winter sunrise. It wasn't the coin that was cursed, it was him. The coin was just the method, the mechanism. What he was really carrying wasn't $20 in gold. It was names, the names of the dead, and his own name, written in blood that wouldn't wash away, waiting to join them. The fire's burning low. I should add more wood, but I'm reluctant to move, reluctant to break the spell of this story, because we're getting close now to the heart of it, to the moment when Jed Lowry finally understood what he'd become and what price he'd have to pay. Not in gold, never in gold. In something far more precious and far more permanent. By the time Jed made it to the desert hermit's place, he'd killed near about 20 people. Not with his hands, not with a gun or a knife, but killed them just the same. 20 souls who'd touched that coin and paid the price for his greed, his cheat, his refusal to accept the consequences of his actions that night in Silver Creek. 20 deaths, and he carried every one of them. Could feel their weight separate from the coin's weight, pressing on. His chest, crushing his lungs, making every breath harder than the last. He'd aged 10 years and 6 months. His hair had gone gray at the temples. Lines creased his face that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man who'd seen hell and barely escaped. Except he hadn't escaped at all. He was still there, still living in it, still carrying it with him everywhere he went. He'd heard about the hermit from a trapper up in Nevada. Old man living out past last chance, way out where the desert gets serious and the nearest water is a day's ride. Man who'd been there since before the war, some said. Man who knew things, dark things, old things that proper folks didn't talk about in daylight. "You got a curse needs lifting?" the trapper had said, sipping whiskey by a campfire while his dog slept at his feet. "You go see the hermit. He can't promise nothing, but he knows more about the dark side of things than any preacher or priest. Course, he might ask a price you ain't willing to pay, but that's between you and him." So Jed had gone. Rode 4 days through country so harsh it didn't even have proper names for things. Just directions and descriptions. Head east toward the flat-topped mesa, then south where the rocks turn red, then west again till you smell sulfur. No trails, no markers, just empty land under a sun that didn't forgive and didn't forget. He found the place just before dark on the 4th day, a sod dugout built into the side of a low hill, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Smoke rising from a pipe chimney. A few scrawny chickens scratching in the dirt. A burro tied to a post, its ribs showing through its hide. The hermit came out before Jed could dismount. Old, ancient, really with skin like dried leather and eyes that were the palest blue Jed had ever seen. Almost white, like he'd stared at too many things not meant for human viewing, and his eyes had been bleached by the experience. "I know why you're here," the hermit said, his voice like wind over sand. "I can smell it on you. Death, fresh and old, all mixed together. You're carrying something that's carrying you." Jed climbed down from his horse, his leg almost given out from the weight of the coin. He was limping bad now, dragging that right leg like it had an anchor tied to it. "Can you help me?" His voice cracked, dry from days without much water. "Can you take it, or break it, or—" The hermit held up one hand, gnarled and spotted with age. "Come inside. We'll talk. But I warn you now there's no easy answers to what you're carrying. Might not be any answers at all." Inside, the dugout was surprisingly cool, surprisingly clean. Shelves lined with jars of dried herbs and powders. A table with books, old books, leather bound. The kind that looked like they'd been written before. Printing presses made everything uniform. A fire burning low in a pit, smoke rising up through the chimney. The hermit gestured to a stool. Jed sat, grateful too. Take the weight off his leg. He pulled out the coin without being asked, set it on the table between them. It gleamed in the firelight, still beautiful despite everything. Still perfect, except for those stains, dark marks that covered near about half of Lady Liberty's face now, that obscured the eagle's wings, that made the coin look diseased despite its golden shine. The hermit looked at it but didn't touch it, wouldn't touch it. He leaned close, squinted at it with those pale eyes, then leaned back and made a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. $20 gold piece, he said. San Francisco Mint, 1,877. Nice coin. Worth exactly what it says on its face. No more, no less. He looked at Jed. But that's not what you see, is it? That's not what it is to you. It's cursed, Jed said. The words came out desperate, pleading. Everyone who touches it dies. I've tried to get rid of it, tried everything, but it keeps coming back. And now it's forcing me to give it away, forcing me to kill people I don't even know. I can't carry this anymore. I can't keep killing people. The hermit nodded slowly. Tell me how you got it, from the beginning. So Jed told him. The whole story, the poker game, the cheat, Tom Garrett losing his lucky piece and later hanging himself, the coin coming back no matter what Jed tried, the deaths that followed whenever he spent it. He laid it all out, every detail, every death, holding nothing back. When he finished, the hermit was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, the desert wind howled like something lonely and lost. Finally, the hermit spoke. It ain't the coin that's cursed, boy. It's you. Jed felt something break inside him, the last fragment of hope maybe, the final piece of denial. What? The coin's just a coin. Gold and metal and symbols, nothing more. But you took something that wasn't yours to take, cheated a good man out of his daughter's future, caused his death, whether you pulled the trigger or not, and then you refused to accept the consequences, tried to get rid of the evidence, tried to abandon your guilt, tried to pass it off to someone else. The hermit leaned forward, those pale eyes boring into Jed's. Every death that followed, that's on you. Not because the coin's cursed, but because you won't accept what you did, won't carry your guilt honest-like. So it manifests itself in ways you can't ignore, comes back to your pocket, kills anyone who touches it, forces you to see your guilt reflected in every person who dies. But I didn't want them to die, Jed said, his voice breaking. I never wanted any of them to die. I just wanted to win. Just once, I wanted to win. And you did win, the hermit said quietly. Won $20. Cost you your soul and the lives of how many people now? 20? More? Seems like a poor bargain to me. Jed put his head in his hands. Can you help me? Can you break this? End it somehow? The hermit shook his head. I can't break what ain't broken. Can't fix what ain't broken neither. The coin's just a coin, boy. The curse is you, your guilt, your refusal to accept consequences, your belief that you can cheat and lie and steal without paying for it. Then what do? Jed was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. How do I stop it? How do I keep from killing more people? The hermit stood, walked to one of his shelves, pulled down a jar filled with something dark and oily. He set it on the table next to the coin. There's only one way to end this, he said. You have to pay the debt yourself. Can't pass it to others anymore. Can't try to get rid of it or abandon it or pretend it ain't yours. You have to accept it, fully and completely. Have to carry it honest, without trying to escape. I am carrying it, Jed said. It won't leave me. I can't get rid of it. No, you're fighting it. Every day, you're trying to escape, trying to pass it off, trying to make it someone else's problem. That's why it keeps forcing you to give it away, why it keeps killing people. It's showing you what you're doing trying to make your guilt someone else's burden. The hermit opened the jar, and a smell like rotten meat and old blood filled the dugout. You want to end this? You take this coin and you bury it deep, not to hide it, not to get rid of it, to claim it. You dig a grave, and you bury everything you've been trying to escape. Your guilt, your lies, your cheating, your refusal to face what you are. You bury it all, and you leave it buried. Stop running. Stop trying to pass it off. Accept your debt, and maybe you'll find some peace. Will it stop the deaths? The hermit shrugged. Maybe not, but it'll stop you causing them, which is what matters. You can't control the coin. It's gold. It's gonna circulate, gonna change hands whether you want it to or not. But you can control yourself. You can choose to carry your guilt honest instead of trying to make others pay for it. He pushed the jar toward Jed. Anoint the coin with this before you bury it. Old recipe, blood and earth and things that bind. Won't curse it, won't bless it, just marks it as yours, as something you're accepting responsibility for. Then bury it deep and walk away. Don't look back. Don't dig it up. Don't try to find it again. Just leave it and move on with whatever life you got left. Jed looked at the jar, at the dark liquid inside. What if it comes back anyway? What if I wake up tomorrow and it's in my pocket again? Then you bury it again, and again, and again, as many times as it takes, until you truly accept what it represents. Until you stop fighting and start accepting. Could take days, could take years, could take forever. The hermit's expression softened just slightly. But that's the price, boy. That's what you owe. Not gold, not money, just acceptance. Just the willingness to carry your guilt without trying, and to escape it. Jed sat there for a long time, staring at that coin, at the stains on it, at the golden shine that seemed dimmer now, tarnished by blood and death and guilt. He thought about Tom Garrett, dangling from a belt in a rented room. Thought about the bartender collapsing behind the bar. Thought about Jack Morton and the shopkeeper and the preacher and all the others whose names he didn't know, whose faces haunted his dreams, whose deaths he carried like stones in his pockets. He thought about running, about refusing the hermit's advice, about continuing as he had been, moving from town to town, watching people die, carrying his guilt in silence and denial. But he was tired. Lord, he was so tired. Tired of running, tired of lying, tired of waking up every morning with that weight in his pocket and the knowledge that today might be the day he killed someone else. He reached for the jar, dipped his fingers in the dark liquid. It was cold and thick, and it smelled like everything wrong with the world distilled into one substance. He picked up the coin and anointed it, covering every surface with that oily darkness until the gold was barely visible, until it looked more like a bloodstain than currency. Where do I bury it? Somewhere it matters, the hermit said. Somewhere that means something to you, your choice. But make it count, make it permanent, and make it honest. Jed left the dugout just after dawn, the coin heavy in his pocket, heavier than ever before now that it was marked with the hermit's binding oil. He rode back the way he'd come, but not toward civilization, toward something else entirely, toward the desert, toward emptiness, toward the place where he could finally do what he should have done months ago. He rode for 2 days, barely stopping to rest, barely eating, driven by something he couldn't name but couldn't resist. Finally, he came to a place that felt right, a stretch of sand and rock with nothing around for miles. Nothing but empty sky and empty land, and the knowledge that here, buried deep, his shame might finally find a place to rest. He dug with his hands, dug until his fingers bled, dug until the hole was deep enough to swallow more than just a coin, deep enough to bury his lies, his greed, his refusal to face what he'd become. He pulled out the coin, held it one last time, feeling its weight, feeling every death it represented, every life he'd taken through his cowardice and denial. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not sure who he was apologizing to. Tom Garrett, the dead, God, himself, maybe all of them, maybe none. He dropped the coin in the hole. Then he dropped his pistol in after it, the weapon he'd thought about turning on himself but hadn't had the courage to use. Dropped his whiskey flask, dropped his marked cards and his holdout rig, all the tools of his trade, all the instruments of his dishonesty. And then, in a burst of understanding that came from somewhere deep and true, he dropped something else. His pride, his excuses, his belief that he could escape the consequences of his choices, all of it, intangible but real, dropped into that grave alongside the physical objects. He filled the hole, patted the sand down smooth, stood there in the desert heat, sweat pouring down his face, and felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness, he didn't deserve that, might never deserve that, but something close to acceptance, the acknowledgement that what he'd done couldn't be undone, but it could be owned, could be carried honest, without trying to pass the weight to others. He walked away, didn't look back, didn't mark the spot, just walked to his horse and rode, leaving that grave and everything in it buried in sand that would shift and change, but hopefully never give up its secrets. That night, he slept better than he had in months. No dreams, no whispers, just darkness and rest. When he woke, his hand went automatically to his pocket. He held his breath, expecting the worst, prepared to dig another grave if necessary. His pocket was empty. He sat up, looked around the small room he'd rented in the nearest town, searching for that golden gleam, that familiar weight. Nothing. The coin was gone. Finally, truly, completely gone. Or was it? Jed Lowry woke that first morning with an empty pocket and something close to hope. The sun was streaming through the window of his rented room, and for the first time in months, he felt light. Not happy, couldn't be happy. Not with 20 deaths on his conscience, but lighter, like a weight had been lifted, even if the memory of carrying it remained. He dressed slow, almost afraid to move too fast, like a sudden motion might shatter whatever spell had been cast. His fingers kept going to that pocket, checking, confirming the absence of the coin. Each time he found nothing, relief washed through him, followed close by the fear that it was temporary, that any moment the coin would reappear and he'd be back where he started. But it didn't appear. Not that morning. Not at breakfast. Not as he walked through town, finally able to look people in the eye without fearing he was about to kill them. The empty pocket felt strange. For months, he'd hated that weight, despised the coin, feared what it represented, but now that it was gone, he felt incomplete, like a part of him was missing, even though that part had been poisonous. He spent the day just walking, reacquainting himself with the simple act of moving through the world without dread. He watched people go about their business, merchants selling, children playing, women gossiping on corners, and marveled that he could observe it all without fear that any of them might touch a cursed coin and drop dead at his feet. That evening, he found a church, a small one, Baptist or Methodist, he wasn't sure which, and didn't much care. He sat in the back pew while the preacher gave his sermon, something about redemption and forgiveness, about how no sin was too great for God's grace. Jed wanted to believe it, wanted to think that maybe, somehow, he could be forgiven for what he'd done. But he knew better. Knew that some things can't be forgiven, only endured, only carried until the weight of them becomes part of who you are. After the service, as folks filed out shaking the preacher's hand and promising to see each other next Sunday, Jed approached the pulpit. The preacher was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and the sort of soft hands that suggested he'd never worked a day in the mines or the fields. "Reverend," Jed said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, brother. What troubles you?" Jed hesitated, choosing his words careful. "If a man does something terrible, really terrible, something that causes people to die, can he ever be forgiven, or is he just damned?" The preacher studied him. "The Lord's grace is infinite, friend. There's no sin beyond forgiveness if the sinner truly repents. But what if he can't undo what he did? What if the people who died, they're still dead, and no amount of sorry is going to bring them back? Then he lives with that burden, yes, but he doesn't have to carry it alone. That's what faith is, trusting that God will help bear what we can't carry by ourselves." Jed nodded, not really convinced, but appreciating the effort. "Thank you, Reverend." He left the church feeling no better but no worse. The preacher meant well, but there was a gap between theology and reality that all the sermons in the world couldn't bridge. God might forgive him, but that didn't change the fact that 20 people were dead because of his greed and cowardice. That night, in his rented room, Jed finally allowed himself to sleep without fear. No coin in his pocket meant no one would die tomorrow because of him. He could rest, at least for tonight. He slept deep, dreamless, the kind of sleep that's usually reserved for the innocent or the exhausted, and Jed was definitely the latter. When he woke, the sun was already up. He stretched, feeling his back pop, feeling his leg twinge where the weight of the coin had made him limp. The pain was still there, but fainter now, like an old injury remembering itself without quite insisting. He swung his legs out of bed, stood, reached for his trousers hanging on the chair, and stopped. There was something in the pocket. He could see it, a bulge in the fabric catching the morning light. No, not possible. He'd buried it, deep, had marked it with the hermit's binding oil, had left it in the desert where no one would ever find it. It couldn't be back. But his hand knew better than his mind. His hand moved to the pocket, slow and reluctant, like approaching a snake you hope is dead, but suspect might still have some bite left in it. His fingers closed around metal, warm metal, familiar metal. He pulled it out, already knowing what he'd see, but hoping somehow he was wrong. The $20 gold piece gleamed in his palm. Jed's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the bed, staring at that coin, feeling everything he'd hoped for yesterday crumble to dust. It was back. Of course it was back. The hermit had said it might take days or years or forever, had said Jed would have to bury it again and again until he truly accepted what it represented. But Jed thought he had accepted it, thought he'd done everything right, anointed the coin, buried it with his weapons and his pride, walked away without looking back. What more could he do? He stared at the coin for a long time, watching the morning light play across its surface. The bending oil was gone. The stains were still there, dark marks on Liberty's face, shadows on the eagle's wings, but the gold gleamed bright again, like it had just been freshly minted. And there was something else. Something Jed hadn't noticed before, or maybe hadn't been able to see until now. The stains formed a pattern, not random marks, but deliberate shapes, like writing, almost, like the coin was trying to tell him something, trying to communicate in a language he didn't quite understand. He brought it closer to his face, squinting at those marks. They shifted in the light, changing as the shadows moved, and for just a moment, just the briefest flash, he could almost make out what they said. Names. The names of the dead, written in their own blood on the surface of the coin that killed them. Jed dropped it like it had burned him, watched it bounce once on the floor and roll toward the door. It stopped there, sitting against the threshold, gleaming innocent and beautiful and terrible. He wanted to leave it, wanted to walk out that door and leave the coin behind, start fresh somewhere the curse couldn't follow. But he knew better now, knew that leaving it wouldn't work, that tomorrow or the next day or next week it would be back in his pocket, warm and heavy, waiting for the next death. The hermit was right. This wasn't about getting rid of the coin. It was about accepting what it meant, what it was, what he had become by winning it. And he hadn't accepted it. Not really. Yesterday, burying it in the desert, he'd been trying to escape, same as he'd been trying to escape since the beginning. Different method, but same intention. Get rid of the evidence, hide the guilt, pretend it never happened. But it did happen, and it would keep happening, keep repeating, until he stopped trying to escape and started trying to understand. He picked up the coin, felt its weight settle into his palm, familiar now as his own heartbeat, studied it in the daylight, really looked at it for the first time since that poker game, months ago. It was beautiful, truly. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every line of Liberty's hair, every feather on the eagle's wings, every letter in the motto, "In God We Trust." Someone had made this coin with care and skill, had turned metal into art, had created something that was meant to last. But art could be beautiful and terrible both, could represent the best and worst of what humans were capable of. This coin was $20, exactly what it said. Not cursed, not haunted, not possessed by demons or dark magic. Just $20 that represented a debt Jed owed and kept trying not to pay. Tom Garrett had saved that coin for his daughter. It mattered to him, meant something beyond its face value. And Jed had taken it with a cheat, had stolen not just the money, but what it represented: hope, a father's love, a future promised and prepared for. That's what the coin was. Not a curse, a reminder, a physical manifestation of what Jed had taken and what he owed. And until he truly understood that, until he stopped seeing it as something to escape and started seeing it as something to carry, honestly and openly and without trying to pass the burden to others, it would keep coming back. Jed looked at himself in the small mirror over the wash basin, saw the gray in his hair, the lines in his face, the haunted look in his eyes. He looked like a man who'd been to hell, which he supposed he had, but he wasn't dead yet, wasn't beyond redemption maybe, wasn't finished paying his debt. He pocketed the coin, felt it settle against his leg, warm and heavy, and instead of fighting that weight, instead of resenting it or fearing it, he tried something different. He accepted it. Just for a moment, just as an experiment, he let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done without trying to escape or justify or explain it away. It hurt. Lord, it hurt worse than anything physical. Felt like his chest was being crushed, like his heart was breaking slow, like his soul was tearing apart at the seams. But it was honest pain, clean pain, the kind that might eventually lead to something like healing, even if forgiveness was still miles and years away. He left the room, left the town, left everything behind except the coin and the lessons it had taught him. Headed out into the territory with no particular destination, no plan beyond keeping moving and seeing what tomorrow brought. The coin stayed in his pocket, stayed warm, stayed heavy, but Jed didn't try to spend it, didn't try to give it away, didn't try to bury it or hide it or pass it to someone else. Just carried it, honest and open, accepting what it was and what it meant. And in that acceptance, small and fragile and probably temporary, was the first real step toward something that might eventually, in some distant future, look like peace. Now, in the years that followed, and we're talking decades here, not just months or seasons, stories started circulating through the territories like smoke on the wind. Tales told in saloons and around campfires, whispered between travelers who'd seen something strange on the lonely roads that cut through desert and mountain, across prairie and through canyon. They spoke of a man who walked alone, always alone. Tall fellow with gray streaks in his hair that turned to full silver as the years rolled on, dressed in dusty black like he was in permanent mourning, with a limp that suggested pain but didn't stop him from moving. He never rode, even when the sun was brutal enough to kill a horse and the distance was measureless. Just walked, steady and determined, like he had somewhere to be but was in no particular hurry to get there. Most peculiar thing about him, folks said, was what he did with his hands. He'd walk with one hand in his pocket, and every so often, regular as clockwork, mechanical almost, he'd pull out something that looked like a coin from a distance. Something gold that caught the sunlight and threw it back in flashes that you could see for half a mile if the angle was right. He'd flip it in the air, high, spinning, catching light with each rotation. Then he'd catch it, never missed, not once in all the sightings people reported, and he'd look at it for a long moment, study it like he was reading a letter or seeing a face he recognized. Then he'd pocket it again, slow and deliberate, and keep walking. 10 minutes later, maybe 15, he'd do it again. Flip, catch, look, pocket, over and over, mile after mile, year after year. Like a habit he couldn't break or a ritual that gave his endless walking some kind of purpose. A prospector named Bill Henderson, and I knew Bill, he wasn't the type to make up stories or see things that weren't there. He swore he encountered the man near Moab, up where the red rocks rise like cathedrals and the Colorado River cuts through stone that's older than human memory. Bill said he was working a claim when he saw this figure in the distance, standing at the edge of a canyon in the late afternoon light. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange and blood red, and this man was just standing there, flipping that coin over and over. Bill watched for near about an 8 hour, he claimed. Watched the coin go up and come down, the man never moving from that spot, never doing anything but flipping and catching and staring at whatever was in his palm. I got close enough to see his face, Bill told me once, whiskey loosening his tongue, and I wish I hadn't. His eyes, they weren't dead exactly, but they weren't alive neither. They were somewhere else, looking at something the rest of us can't see, something that haunted him worse than any ghost could. Bill said he called out, asked if the man needed help or water or company. The man turned slow, looked right at Bill, and for just a moment Bill thought he was going to speak, going to say something that might explain what he was doing out there alone, but he didn't. Just turned back to the canyon, flipped that coin one more time, caught it, pocketed it, and walked away. Disappeared into the coming darkness, his silhouette getting smaller and smaller until it was just another shadow among shadows, and then it was gone entirely. I tried to follow his tracks next morning, Bill said, but they just ended. After about 100 yards, they just stopped, like he'd been picked up by angels or demons or something in between, or like he'd never been there at all. Other folks had similar encounters. A school teacher in Silver City claimed she saw him outside her classroom window one afternoon when the children were at recess. Said he stood there in the yard, partially hidden by a cottonwood tree, that coin flipping through his fingers in a constant motion that mesmerized her. She said his face carried such profound sadness that it broke her heart to look at him like he was watching the children play and remembering something he'd lost, or seeing something he'd destroyed, or maybe just wishing he could be innocent again like they were, able to laugh without the weight of the world pressing down. She went outside to ask if he needed anything, if she could help, but by the time she crossed the schoolyard, maybe 30 seconds, he was gone. Just dust settling on the road and the faint echo of footsteps walking away, and that persistent image in her mind of a man so weighted down by sorrow that it seemed to bend the very air around him. A freight driver on the trail between Santa Fe and Denver swore he offered the man a ride. Said it was a cold November day with snow threatening, and here was this fellow, walking alone without provisions visible, without a horse, without anything but the clothes on his back, and whatever he carried in his pockets. I pulled up alongside him, the driver told folks in a tavern in Pueblo, and I said, "Friend, you're going to freeze if you keep walking. Let me give you a lift to the next town." And he stopped. First time I'd seen him, not moving, and he looked at me with these eyes that were just empty. Not mean, not angry, just empty, like somebody had scooped out whatever makes a person and left just the shell. The driver said the man reached into his pocket, pulled out a gold coin, and held it up between them. "You want this?" the man asked, his voice rusty from disuse. $20 yours free and clear. All you got to do is take it. Something in the driver's gut told him no. Told him that taking that coin would be the worst mistake of his life, though he couldn't have explained why. So he shook his head, tipped his hat, and drove on. When he looked back a minute later, the man was walking again, that coin disappearing back into his pocket, his figure already distant against the vast emptiness of the prairie. "I don't know what would have happened if I'd taken it," the driver said, his hand shaking a little as he lifted his whiskey glass. "But I know that I'd be dead now if I had. Don't ask me how I know. I just do. The stories multiplied and evolved the way stories do. Got bigger in some tellings, stranger in others, more elaborate with each campfire and each bottle of whiskey. Some versions had him walking through walls. Others had him disappearing when you looked away and reappearing miles distant. A few claimed he left no footprints at all, just walked across sand and snow without leaving a trace. Most folks dismissed these embellishments as the usual exaggerations that attach themselves to any tale told often enough. But they couldn't dismiss the core of it, the part that stayed consistent across all the tellings. There was a man walking the territories. He carried a gold coin. He couldn't stop walking, couldn't stop flipping that coin, couldn't rest, and seeing him was like looking at a cautionary tale made flesh, a reminder written in dust and distance that some debts can't be paid off, only carried forever. The Chisholm Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, the Oregon Trail travelers on all of them reported sightings. Always at a distance, always alone, that tall figure in black with the limp and the coin, moving through heat, shimmer, and dust like a mirage that never quite solidified but never quite disappeared neither. Some said if you saw him, bad luck would follow, your wagon would break down, your horse would go lame, your water would spoil before you reached the next town. Others claimed the opposite, that seeing him was a blessing of sorts, a reminder to be grateful for what you had and not to reach for what didn't belong to you. A cattle rancher up in Wyoming told his hands about spotting the walker 3 times over 5 years, always in the same general area, always in autumn when the leaves were turning and the air had that particular crispness that warns of winter coming. It's like he's stuck in a loop, the rancher said, walking the same stretch of country over and over, year after year, never getting anywhere, never arriving at any destination, just walking because that's all he can do. That's all that's left to him. One of the ranch hands, young fellow, couldn't have been more than 20. He laughed and said it was all superstition and nonsense. Said there was no such thing as cursed coins or men condemned to walk forever, that it was probably just some old prospector who liked his solitude and people's imaginations were filling in the rest. The rancher didn't argue, just looked at the young man and said, "Maybe you're right, but I'll tell you this, I seen his eyes once, got close enough for that. And whatever he's carrying, whatever waits on him, it's real. Realer than most things in this world. You can believe that or not, but don't go seeking him out to prove me wrong. Some things are better left alone. In the Southwest, among the Navajo and Apache, the walker became part of the oral tradition. They had their own name for him, different from tribe to tribe, but always meaning roughly the same thing. The man who carries his death, or the walker who cannot stop, or he who flips the Sunday. The tribal elders said he was a warning about greed, about taking what the spirits hadn't given freely. They said the coin he carried was made from stolen fire, and that each flip was him asking the spirits for forgiveness that would never come. They said he'd walk until the mountains crumbled to dust, until the rivers ran dry, until the sun itself burned out, and even then he might not find rest. Whether that was their original belief, or whether they'd heard the story from white settlers and incorporated it into their own traditions, nobody could say for certain. But they took it seriously enough to warn their children. Don't take what isn't offered. Don't cheat in games of chance. Don't let greed make you into something you can't stop being. As the decades rolled on, and we're talking now about the 1,890 seconds, the turn of the century, even into the early 1900s, the sightings continued, less frequent maybe as the West got more settled, as railroads replaced wagon trails and towns replaced camps. But they never stopped entirely. A railroad engineer in 1903 claimed he saw the walker crossing the tracks ahead of his train, somewhere in the Nevada desert. Said he blew the whistle to warn him off, but the man just kept walking at that same steady pace, flipping his coin, not hurrying, not even looking at the approaching locomotive. The engineer said he pulled every brake, did everything he could to stop in time. The train was still doing maybe 20 miles an hour when it reached the spot where the man should have been. But there was nothing, no body, no blood, no sign anyone had ever been there. Just empty tracks stretching to the horizon, and the engineer's certainty, absolute certainty, that he'd seen a man walking across those rails with a gold coin spinning in his hand. Ghost, the engineer said later, and nobody who heard the conviction in his voice thought to argue. By World War I, the story had become legend, had passed from current event to folklore, from something that was happening to something that had happened, preserved in tellings around campfires and in saloons, part of the fabric of Western mythology, alongside tales of lost gold mines and phantom stagecoaches, and women in white who flagged down travelers on lonely roads. But some folks, old-timers mostly, people who'd been in the territory since the 1,870 seconds and 80 seconds they swore the walker was still out there, still moving through the empty places, still flipping that coin, still carrying whatever burden had bent him into this endless pattern of walking and flipping and hoping for something that would never come. He's waiting for the coin to land on its edge, they'd say, repeating a detail that had become central to the legend. That's the only way the curse breaks. If he flips it and it lands on its edge instead of heads or tails, he's free. But coins don't do that. Can't do that, not in nature. So he keeps flipping, keeps hoping, keeps walking, forever trapped in his own impossible hope. Some said that was mercy, that God or fate or whatever forces govern such things had given him a chance, however slim, of redemption, that every flip was another roll of the cosmic dice, another opportunity for the impossible to happen. Others said it was the cruelest punishment imaginable to be given hope that could never be fulfilled, to be told there's a way out while knowing that way is sealed tighter than any prison, that the real torture wasn't the walking or the weight or even the guilt, but the hope that kept him flipping that coin long after he should have given up. A writer fellow from back east, one of those journalist types who came out to the territories looking for stories to sell to magazines. He got interested in the legend around 1,910 or so, spent 2 years tracking down sightings, interviewing people who claimed to have seen the walker, trying to separate fact from fiction. He published his findings in Harper's Monthly under the title, The Wandering Penitent of the Western Territories. It was a good article, well-researched, balanced between skepticism and openness to the possibility that something real was behind all the stories. His conclusion was measured. Whether the walker is a real man suffering a real penance, or a collective hallucination born from the guilt and greed that characterized the Western expansion, or something stranger still that defies easy categorization, this much is certain. He has become real in the minds and hearts of those who tell his story. And perhaps that kind of reality, the reality of meaning and warning and moral weight, is more important than the reality of flesh and blood. The writer tried to find the walker himself, spent months wandering the territories, following reported sightings, camping in places where people had seen him most frequently, but he never encountered the man. Came close a few times, or thought he did, saw a figure in the distance that might have been him, heard footsteps on gravel when no one was there, once found a set of tracks that seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappear into nothing, but he never saw the coin flip, never saw the face, never got close enough to know for certain. Perhaps that's fitting, he wrote in the conclusion of his article. Perhaps the walker exists just beyond the edge of certainty, in that liminal space between real and imagined, where legends live and morals take human form. To see him clearly might be to destroy what he represents. Better, maybe, that he remains always at the edge of vision, always possible but never quite proven, forever walking in the borderlands between fact and folklore. Pretty words, those, but the old-timers who'd actually seen the walker, they knew better, knew he wasn't folklore or symbol or collective hallucination. He was real. As real as the desert and the mountains and the roads that connected them, as real as guilt and regret and the weight of choices that can't be undone. Somewhere out there, maybe still, even now, even in this modern world of automobiles and airplanes and electric lights, the walker keeps moving, keeps flipping his coin, keeps hoping it'll land on its edge and set him free. And every person who sees him, every traveler who spots that tall figure in the distance with his limp and his endless ritual of flip-catch look pocket, they carry away the same message, that greed has consequences, that what you take, you carry, that some debts can't be paid off with money or time or regret, only endured until the universe decides you've carried them long enough, that there are worse things than dying, like living forever with what you've done, walking an endless road with an impossible hope and an unbearable weight, never resting, never finding peace, just moving because that's all that's left. The road that never ends, the coin that never lands right, the walker who can't stop walking. That's the legend. That's what grew from Jed Lowry's story, if that's even who he was anymore after all those years, all those miles, all that endless flipping of a gold piece that represented everything he'd taken and everything he owed. Maybe it's mercy that keeps him walking. Maybe moving is all that prevents him from collapsing under the weight. Maybe as long as his feet keep moving and that coin keeps flipping, there's hope, however impossible, that redemption might come. Or maybe it's greed, still alive after all these years, still looking for company, still trying to pass that coin to someone else, still hoping to escape the burden by making it someone else's problem. Either way, the road stretches on. The coin keeps flipping, and the walker keeps walking, a figure in the distance, forever approaching but never arriving, forever leaving but never quite gone. And his legend keeps growing, spreading through new generations, taking on new details and new meanings, but always carrying the same essential truth at its core, that what we take unfairly, we carry forever. That greed extracts prices we can't imagine paying when we first reach for what ain't ours, that some roads, once started on, don't have an end. We can see only an endless middle that stretches on until time itself gives out. The walker, the coin, the road that never ends. That's the legend that grew from one crooked poker game in Silver Creek, Montana in the year 1877 or thereabouts. And whether he's still out there or finally found rest, whether he's flesh or spirit or something in between, whether he's real or just a story we tell ourselves to remember important truths, well, that depends on what you believe and on whether you've ever seen him yourself, that tall figure limping through the desert heat or the mountain cold, that coin spinning endlessly through the air, catching light and throwing it back like a signal or a warning or a prayer that's never answered. Some roads end, some roads don't, and the walker's road that one just keeps going, mile after endless mile, flip after endless flip, hope after impossible hope. Forever might be a long time, but for some debts, forever ain't long enough. The fire's almost gone now, just coals glowing red and orange in the darkness, barely pushing back the cold that's settled in deep around us. My coffee's gone cold in the cup, and my bones are reminding me that I ain't as young as I used to be, that these late nights telling stories take more out of me than they once did. But this story needed telling, needed to be told proper, from start to finish, with all the weight and all the truth it carries. Jed Lowry, Tom Garrett, that $20 gold piece, and the years, decades, really of walking that followed, all of it connected, all of it flowing from one moment of greed, one crooked card game, one choice to take what wasn't earned. I've been thinking on this story for a long time now, partner, turning it over in my mind the way Jed turned over that coin in his hand, looking at it from different angles, trying to understand what it means, what lesson it's trying to teach us through all the tragedy and terror. And I think I finally got it figured, or as figured as any man can get when he's dealing with matters of guilt and grace and the prices we pay for being human. Most folks who hear this tale, they focus on the supernatural parts. The coin that keeps coming back, the deaths that follow whenever it's spent, the impossibility of escaping something that won't let go. They make it a ghost story, something to shiver at around the campfire, something safely distant from their own lives. But that ain't what this story's really about. That's just the wrapper, the package that makes the real message easier to swallow. What this story's really about, what it's always been about, is the things we carry, the weights we take on, sometimes knowingly, sometimes by accident, that become part of who we are. The debts we owe that can't be paid with money or time, only carried until we learn whatever lessons they're meant to teach us. See, I told you at the start that most folks think curses come from devils and dark magic. But the truth is, partner and I mean this with every worn-out fiber of my being. Curses come from the things we won't let go. Not the coin, not the gold, not the physical object at all. What we won't let go of is the guilt, the shame, the knowledge of what we've done, and the refusal to accept it fully. We try to bury it, to hide it, to pass it to others, to run from it. And in that running, in that refusal to accept, we trap ourselves in patterns that repeat endlessly until we finally stop and face what we've been carrying. Jed didn't want to carry his guilt for cheating Tom Garrett, so he tried to get rid of the coin, tried to abandon the evidence, tried to pass it to others. And every time he did, someone died not because the coin was cursed, but because he was trying to make his burden someone else's, was trying to escape consequences by making other people pay his debt. The coin didn't curse Jed. It just showed him what he already was, a man who took what wasn't his and then spent years trying not to pay for it. The coin was a mirror, reflecting back his own choices, his own character, his own refusal to accept that actions have consequences and debts must be paid. And when he finally started to accept that, when he stopped fighting the coin and started carrying it honest, that's when the death stopped. Not because some supernatural curse lifted, but because he wasn't trying to pass his burden to others anymore, wasn't trying to make them pay what he owed. He carried his own weight, and in that carrying, painful and endless as it was something that looked like redemption. Not forgiveness, maybe, not peace, but at least honesty. At least the dignity of facing what he'd done without flinching away. Now, that hermit told Jed the truth straight out. Didn't sugarcoat it or make it easier than it was. Said the only way to end the cycle was to accept it, fully, completely, without trying to escape, to bury the coin, not to get rid of it, but to claim it. To acknowledge it as his burden, his debt, his responsibility. And Jed tried. Lord knows he tried. Buried that coin with his weapons and his pride and all his excuses. Walked away thinking maybe he'd finally done enough. But acceptance ain't a one-time thing, see? It's a choice you make every single day, sometimes every single hour. It's waking up and choosing to carry your weight instead of trying to set it down somewhere it don't belong. It's facing what you've done instead of running from it. It's admitting that some things can't be fixed, can't be undone, can only be endured. The coin came back because Jed hadn't truly accepted it yet, hadn't truly owned what it meant. He'd gone through the motions, done the ritual, but in his heart, he was still trying to be free of it rather than at peace with it. So he walked for 30 years, maybe more. Walked until his body bent and his hair turned gray and his face became a map of every mile he'd traveled and every death he'd witnessed. Walked flipping that coin over and over, each flip a question he already knew the answer to, each catch a reminder of what he carried and why. Was it punishment? Was it penance? Was it both or neither or something in between that we don't have good words for? I think it was Jed finally learning, slowly, painfully, over decades, how to carry his guilt without trying to escape it, how to acknowledge what he'd done without letting it destroy him, how to accept that he'd caused harm, real harm, permanent harm, and that no amount of walking would undo it. But that walking honest with that knowledge was better than running from it. The coin kept flipping not because he was waiting for it to land on its edge. That's just what the legend says, the story people tell to make sense of something that don't make easy sense. The real reason he kept flipping it was to remind himself, every single time, of what he carried and why. Each flip was a prayer, maybe, or a confession, or just a way of saying, I remember. I know what I did. I ain't forgetting, ain't pretending, it didn't happen, ain't making excuses. I'm carrying this because it's mine to carry. And in that constant remembering, in that refusal to let himself off the hook or forget or pretend that was his redemption. Not freedom from the burden, but the strength to carry it honest. Now I'm sitting here by these dying coals and I'm thinking about all of us. About you, about me, about everybody who's ever done something they regret, ever taken something that wasn't theirs, ever hurt someone and then tried to run from the consequences. We all got our coins, partner. Might not be literal gold pieces, might not manifest as objects at all, but we all carry weights that came from choices we made, things we did, harm we caused. And the question ain't whether we carry these things. We do. We all do. Can't be human without accumulating some guilt, some regret, some knowledge of ways we've failed. The question is how we carry 'em. Do we try to escape? Try to bury them and pretend they never happened? Try to justify them until they don't seem so bad? Try to pass them to others? Make our guilt someone else's burden? Do we spend our lives running from the weight of what we've done? Or do we accept it, own it, carry it honest, without trying to make it disappear or transform it into something it ain't? Do we face what we've done, acknowledge the harm, and then just carry it? Not as punishment exactly, but as part of who we are, part of our story, part of the weight that makes us human. That's the choice Jed faced. That's the choice we all face, every day, in ways big and small. And here's what I've learned, what this story teaches, if you listen close. The weights we accept, we can carry. The weights we fight against, they crush us. The weights we try to escape, they chase us. But the weights we own, we can integrate into who we are, can make them part of our strength instead of our burden. Jed walked for 30 years, maybe 40, maybe more. And yes, it was hard. Yes, it cost him everything: his youth, his peace, his chance at a normal life. But in that walking, in that constant flipping of the coin and refusal to forget, he became something more than just a cheat who'd caused deaths. He became a man who carried his debt without complaint, who faced his guilt without flinching, who accepted his burden without trying to pass it to others. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Maybe after enough years of honest carrying, the debt was paid not in gold, but in steps taken, in miles walked, in constant acknowledgement of what he owed. Maybe he finally found rest, or maybe he's still out there, still walking, still flipping that coin. I don't know. Can't know. The story don't tell us the ending because maybe there ain't an ending, just a continuation of the same lesson taught over and over until we finally learn it. But I'll tell you what I believe, what my gut tells me. After years of thinking on this tale, I believe Jed Lowry walked until he understood, walked until he truly, deeply accepted what he'd done and stopped fighting against it. Walked until the coin wasn't a curse anymore, wasn't a burden he carried unwillingly, but was just part of who he was, a reminder, a teacher, a weight that had become as natural to him as his own heartbeat. And when he reached that point when acceptance became so complete that there was no separation between him and his guilt, no struggle between what he wanted and what he carried, that's when the walking stopped. Not because the curse lifted, but because he didn't need to walk anymore. Had learned the lesson, paid the debt not in blood or gold, but in honest acknowledgement carried across thousands of miles and thousands of days. The gold never cursed. Jed Lowry. It just showed him what he already was. And over 30 years of walking, he became something different, something that had integrated its guilt instead of fighting it, that had owned its burden instead of fleeing it. That's what this story teaches. That's the lesson worth carrying away from this cold night and this dying fire. The things we take unfairly, we carry. The things we refuse to accept, they control us. The things we own fully, they become part of our strength. And the only way forward, the only way to find any kind of peace with what we've done, is to stop running, stop hiding, stop trying to escape or justify or forget. Just accept, just carry. Just walk honest with our weight, however heavy it is, however long the road might be. Some roads end quickly, some take a lifetime, and some, like Jed's, might take even longer. But every road starts with that first step of acceptance, that first moment of saying, "This is mine. I did this. I own it. I'll carry it." Everything else, all the walking, all the flipping, all the years of moving through empty spaces, that's just the working out of what that acceptance means. That's just the journey we take to understand fully what we've claimed as ours. The fire's out now, just darkness and cold and the vast silence of the desert night pressing in from all sides. Time to head inside, time to let this story settle into your mind where it'll either teach you something or just be another tale you'll half remember come morning. But before you go, before you ride off into whatever darkness awaits, I want to leave you with this. Pay attention to what you're reaching for. Pay attention to what you're taking. because everything has weight and every choice has consequences, and the debts we incur, especially when we take unfairly, they don't disappear just because we want them to. They stay. They accumulate. They grow heavier until we face them. Better to not incur the debt in the first place. But if you've already taken something that wasn't yours, or hurt someone you can't make amends to, or done harm that can't be undone, then accept it. Own it. Carry it honest. Don't try to escape. Don't try to hide. Don't try to pass your burden to someone else. Just carry it. Walk with it. Let it become part of who you are instead of something you're constantly running from. That ain't easy. Lord knows it ain't easy. Might be the hardest thing a person can do. But it's the only way forward that leads anywhere worth going. Jed Lowry learned that lesson the hard way through 30 years of walking and thousands of miles of road. You got the chance to learn it easier just by hearing his story and heeding its warning. Take that gift, use it. And when you find yourself tempted to take what ain't yours, when you feel the pull of greed or the urge to cheat or the desire to escape consequences, remember the walker, remember the coin. Remember the price that gets paid when we choose escape over acceptance. Remember and choose different. The night's got us all now, wrapped in its cold and its darkness. The story's told, the lessons laid out, and the rest is up to you. May your road be shorter than Jed's. May your burden be lighter. May you learn acceptance before life forces you to walk it into your bones. And if you ever see a man walking alone in the empty places, tall and dusty, with a limp and a coin spinning endlessly through his fingers, well, you leave him be. He's got his own road to walk, his own weight to carry, his own lessons to learn or maybe to teach by his example. We all do. We all got our own coins, our own weights, our own roads. The question ain't whether we'll carry something we all will. The question is whether we'll carry it honest or spend our lives trying to run. Choose honest, partner. Choose acceptance. Choose the hard road that leads somewhere instead of the easy road that just circles back on itself. Forever. That's what Jed's story teaches. In the end, that's the truth of the coin that kept coming back. Not that we're cursed, not that we're punished, just that we're responsible. And responsibility, once truly accepted, becomes bearable, becomes part of us, becomes something we can carry without it crushing us. The coin kept coming back not to torment Jed, but to teach him. And now it comes back to us, through this story, through this lesson, through this cold night and these ancient truths, that what we take, we keep, that what we keep, we carry, and that the only way to carry anything worth carrying is honest, with eyes open and heart accepting of the weight. Good night, partner. Safe travels. And remember the walker when temptation comes calling. Remember, and choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong. That's all any of us can do, and maybe, just maybe, it's enough. The story's told, the fire's out, the darkness is complete, and somewhere out there, maybe, still, a man walks on, carrying his coin, flipping it endless, teaching us all, if we're willing to learn, what it means to own our choices and carry our debts, what it means to accept instead of escape, what it means to be human, flawed, and still walking toward something that might look like redemption. That's the end of this tale. That's all I got to tell. Now go on, get yourself warm, get yourself home, and carry your own coins honest. That's the best any of us can hope to do. Rest easy, if you can. The mountains remember, the desert knows, and the stories they keep getting told, keep teaching their lessons, keep reminding us of what matters when everything else is blown away like dust in the wind, the coin that kept coming back, the debt that couldn't be escaped, only carried, the road that led nowhere and everywhere at once. That's the truth of it. That's all the truth there is. Good night.